welcome back. I know this just kind of looks like a random assortment of parts I've put on the bench here. However, what it is actually the next step in the review for this thing, our TEG 10G ECTX 10 gigabit PCIe network adapter. There's an unboxing, and I did a little bit of a tour and a comparison to some other adapters previously. If you haven't seen that yet, go ahead and go check it out. However, one thing that's needed for this, since it is a PCI Express add-in card, is a computer to host it. Now, I could have theoretically, taken a card out of my desktop and used it. However, I don't want to drag it here into the studio. That is a 70-pound desktop, and it's just a brute of a machine. Way overkill for this. This is actually going to be more in line with the type of system that this would normally go in. This is a business grade desktop, and although it is a bit unassuming looking, after I'm done using it for this review, because most of this is way overkill just for testing this adapter, it's going to be turned into a gaming system. So I dug this out of mothballs, and I've used this for a variety of things previously. It's been a Minecraft server for multiple worlds. It's been a VM host. I've run Plex on it. I've used it for a firewall before. Really flexible little systems with one big caveat, and that is everything's low profile, which is perfectly fine for a network adapter. It came with a low profile bracket. Does limit me a little bit on the graphics card side of the equation. We're going to have a video of this once we're done testing the network adapter with a 1650 not TI, just 1650 low profile that I ordered for it. And that's perfectly fine for systems like this. You can quite quickly, and I'll go through some of the value analysis at some point, probably at the end of the gaming video, make a gaming system out of a desktop like this. You can pick these up anywhere from $100 to $200, depending on generation and features, and just tune them up and you're off to the races. For our particular instance, we've got 4 sticks of ballistic sport memory from Crucial that we looked at previously. It's been a long time since I reviewed those. DDR3, not exactly top of the class anymore, but perfectly fine. I've got a 3770, which is not the original CPU from this system, but runs in it just fine. Originally it had a 3570, which if I had just bought this for this purpose, the 3570 would be perfectly fine as well. I've got an assortment of drives here that I'm actually going to be cramming in where the optical drive used to go. I've got a Patriot 120 Nitro, Patriot 120 Pyro. I had it sitting on a shelf. It came out of a system upgrade I did. It's going to be the boot drive. If I was doing this with the intent, if I was purchasing things for it, I probably would have picked a bigger SSD, maybe an MX 500. And then I've just got some 500 gig, 7200 RPM HGST. That one even still says Hitachi. Spinners that I'm going to make a RAID 5 that gives me 1 terabyte of faster than just a single drive space for hosting things out of a Steam library on. Because there are games at this point that I think won't even actually fit on that Pyro if it was just a game drive, much less once it has a operating system on it. And we're just going to use the included heatsink. I actually like the design on the included heatsink here. I would have liked to have seen a copper core with a vapor chamber potentially, but the heatsink, I know square is not super popular. The fins are spaced out, but just the way it fits in the pre-designed system works really nicely. It's got these nice gaskets, keeps its airflow directed the way it wants to, and just works pretty well. Other stuff, we've got some Thermal Grizzly Cryonaut here that we're going to use. That's the thermal compound I use for everything. It is just about as good as you can get before you go to liquid metal. And I've got a little electric screwdriver here that I bought from Creation Space that'll just make some of these removing and replacing screws a little easier. So first thing I'm going to do is we're just going to go ahead and pop the memory in there while there's nothing in the way, since it doesn't get in the way. And I like to give these a little push and listen for that snap. Alright, next up, I'm actually going to grab some rubbing alcohol here and get a paper towel and clean off that CPU. It's got some old thermal paste from the last place I had it installed, which was actually, I think, my old Plex server still, but after it had migrated, actually, the last place that CPU was installed was our old SSD test bench. Go ahead and check out some of our earlier SSD articles. I think I have one detailing what we do and how we do things that included the old bench. That used this CPU. So that's where this is from. You don't need a 3770 if you're going to be doing something like this. Like I said, the 34... the i5 that was in it before would have been more than sufficient. However, there's nothing wrong with overkill, and since I have one, I'm going to go ahead and use it. And these are relatively straightforward. If you look, your CPU, you've got a couple of notches here, there's a couple of notches there, and you just kind of set it in, give it a little wiggle, and lock her into place. There are days I do not miss the bent pins on the CPUs for the socket 370 era. Or 775 was an LGA. Alright, we are going to go with, there's a couple of different schools of thought on how to apply thermal paste. Personally, I like to use a small line across the heat spreader for Intel CPUs in this orientation. And for those who can't see, we are going to go this way. The reason for that, the die is not square, even though the CPU package is relatively square. It's actually a rectangle, and that is its orientation underneath the heat spreader for Intel CPUs. So what I don't care about getting it in the corners, I care about getting it across that center line where the die actually contacts the heat spreader. So we are gonna, God, this is tough thermal paste. Alright, so we are going to go ahead and just move a couple of things so I can rotate this for easier access. Because I want to plug in the fan first, since the shroud on this fan actually blocks where that is. Actually, I guess I could install the shroud after I can separate those after I've installed the heatsink. Those are some tight clearances. Now, although I have an electric screwdriver here, for something like this, because mounting pressure is of concern, I'm actually not going to use that. And why do I feel like that's not quite... That's not lined up, so let's rotate this. Once you get the opposing corners lined up, everything goes in easy. Nope, it's there, it just needs a push. All right. I'm going to rotate it back here, since that just looks better on camera. What's great about these, as far as retention mechanisms go, is because they use a spring to hold it. You don't have to worry about the exact mounting pressure, you just go till it stops. Once it stops, it's tight. There's no push pins to fool around with. There's plenty of mounting torque to guarantee a good paste application. And we will, when we do the gaming video on this system, we'll actually go ahead and pull it up and look at how the paste spread out. And there's just this little plastic shroud that helps direct the air. Most of this, you know, we're done with the normal hard stuff. At this point, it's just a few minutes to put these drives in this tray, which then slides into here. And then, oh, that's right, I had that in a super micro, so I gotta pull those plates off real quick, because those get in the way. Neat, those screws are stripped. I will be right back. Alright, I am back, and I managed to get those super micro adapter plates off. So now I have this, and as I was saying, I'm just going to install this where the optical drive was. No big deal there. The one issue, and you probably just noticed it, is that since this was built specifically for a Thinkcentre optical drive that would be held onto by some of these locking plates, it's just gonna slide through. It's not gonna stay where I want it to be, which is right about there. So my solution to that, once I've got all my drives in it, is just gonna be, you know, relatively simple double-sided tape. I'm gonna put a piece or two in here and just make things stay where I want them to stay. So, with that out of the way, I'm actually gonna move this back a bit so we can work on the drives. Now, this is a lithium-ion powered screwdriver kit that I purchased a couple of years ago at this point, and I love this thing. When I'm doing stuff like this where I'm literally taking out and reinstalling, well, let's see, 10 screws total just for this operation. And honestly, if I had all the drive screws that I should, which I don't because I always manage to run out of these things, I should probably start buying them in bulk. I'd have, 18 screws in total. So this is a nice little kit. It's just got these magnetic plates on it that store all your bits, all your different sizes, your pentalobes, your little winged tips here, some of your hexes, Phillips, all the way down to quadruple zero. We've got slotted and squares and stars and all the weird ones. Here's some tri-tips and all the good stuff. Now for this, because we're just using good old-fashioned drive screws, I'm just going to grab one of the Phillips drivers that fits these. Yep. I think that's actually, yeah, that's number 2 Phillips, oddly enough. And we're going to start by pulling. Huh! This plate is not number 2. I would have assumed it would be since the drive screws are. This plate is number 1 Phillips from the looks of it. And it's just that simple. Press the button and off it goes. I will have a link to it in the description. This piece is not necessarily a necessity. This piece is personal preference. This system did come with a adapter to use 3.5-inch drives in there. I took that out long ago. But this fun little thing lets me put 4 SATA drives internally, which is actually a necessity because the fun little hot swap drives get blocked by the adapter here. So I'm going to put these 2 spinners on top. I'm just going to give you guys 2 screws each because I've only got 6 screws to work with. Wait, I need to change that. And just as before, we just line it up and off it goes. And I'm going to put these in with the screw on the drive end, or on the connector end closest to the data connector, because that's the one I'm worried about potentially damaging if anything ever goes awry. So on the inside, we're going to go ahead and put in our Patriot pyro first. And I'm going to put that here. And conveniently, because I've packed 2 drives in next to each other, they're also going to kind of help keep each other in place. I'm not particularly worried about anything going too far. There's nowhere for them to really go in this assembly, especially once it's done. This then sits here on top of the other drives and kind of is also going to help hold those in place since it's in contact with them. Just give it a little bit of flex. Come on. This the hard part. I mean, it's always the hard part, but there. Stupid thing. And there's that side. So I'm just going to put, oh, that's right. These are a different size. Goes in there. Goes in there. Now, in this instance, I'm using all SATA drives. If I had a newer system, like the M82 M700s, I believe, were the first ones. Maybe the M710s. Everybody made that jump in a slightly different order. I would have the option to use an NVMe drive. So, believe it or not, even these small business desktops, you can go all the way to NVMe. I believe this generation, not so much, but the generation after it, I could boot from NVMe if I wanted to, but I would need an adapter. So, here's this. And like I said, it's just going to kind of slide in there, and I'm just going to really quick gauge where I want it to sit, which is right about here. Good. And then cut, I don't know, a healthy strip of double-sided tape for here. The other effect of this double-sided tape is that it is going to, and I'm going to actually use the slotted end of this screwdriver to peel that up some because it's fighting with me. Tweezers would also have been a good choice here. There we go. It's going to help dampen the vibration since this is foam tape. Come on. Just get that good push. And we should. Beautiful. Alrighty. So next on the agenda is actually going to be wiring those drives to do anything useful. And this is the part where unfortunately my spare parts bin falls a little bit short. You can see we don't have a particularly far distance to go. If I had some 1-foot cables, that would be perfect. Unfortunately, although I have a couple of reasonably sized cables, actually this one may end up being too short. Most of mine are obnoxiously long, so this is okay. And then we start getting into this territory very quickly. So I'm just going to grab one slightly longer cable than that blue one, which I thought was going to reach, but I don't think is going to now. And I'll use this right angle cable that I happen to have that should, nope. Alright, straight cable it is. Which means, unfortunately, I'm going to have to use something far longer than I would like to. Oh, actually, there we go. That's more reasonable. So I'm going to plug this SSD in. I'm going to connect it, and that was bound to happen. I'm going to connect that specifically to SATA 1. I have found on some of these boards, SATA 1 and SATA 2, or SATA 0 and 1, depending on who has labeled it and how, are your only SATA 6 ports. And that's really only a concern with older systems. However, it still is worth worrying about. Now why is that locking connector Yeah, why is that locking connector not locking at all? Works there. It's not going to work on the Patriot drive. All right. Well, good job, Patriot. So I'm just going to go ahead and use this red cable here. That's a bummer. There's no there's too much space above the drive itself for the locking connector to work, which just kind of sucks. You know what? I think I'm going to try to color code these slightly. I'll put, my black cable on the black port and the red cable on the red port, which unfortunately also leaves me with an orange cable on an orange port and this orange-red cable on the other orange port, so that doesn't quite line up. Anyway, as I was saying, I want to make sure that the SSD is connected to a 6 gig SATA port. And as far as the rest of the drives go, well, spinning disks don't really saturate SATA 6, no matter which way you cut it. So I'm not super concerned on those. And I've got a couple of these. Let's see, there's one. There's the other. These are just SATA splitters. There's only 2 SATA power connectors inside this system. From a functional standpoint, there's more than enough power to feed everything I've installed today. Let's read it off. This is a 240 watt power supply. Now, some quick napkin math says, well, wait a second. You told me I could install a graphics card in there. Well, the reason I told you that was that I'm going to install a 1650 and that only uses 75 watts. It doesn't have any supplemental power. So between a CPU that's, if this was a brand new, we'll say, what was that, 9900? Was the last one that was limited this way? Brand new 9900. I'm looking at a 95 watt TDP, even though it can theoretically draw more. Business systems like this really lock things down to their TDP typically. So you get 95 watts on the CPU. I think this is actually not even a full 95 watt TDP on the 3770. And then 75 for a graphics card. Well, great. So that's 75, 95, 170. That leaves me with a sum total of 70 watts for everything else. Even if I assume each one of these drives and each one of those memory modules pulls a full 5 watts each, which is enormous. I've got 4 and 4, so 8 times 5, that's 40 watts. I don't have enough USB ports on here to pull another 30 watts out of the system. I just don't. If this was a mini tower unit, I might be a little more upset that I don't have a bigger power supply, since in those a larger graphics card will in fact fit. And if I was building this, myself from scratch, I'd probably put a 500 in there just as the minimum. However, in this case, I'm going to fold that down. And then I think I'm going to attempt some cable management after I have these out of the way. So that locks in that way. And then this one connects to here. And then these, I actually want, can I fold this down under? with it? Yes, I can. Beautiful. Not perfect. Some thinner SATA cables would have made this easier. I have recently worked with some that I would have definitely preferred to use for this. And if you're attempting something like this yourself, I would certainly suggest looking this vendor up. I got some Cable Creation SATA to SATA cables, and those were fantastic for a couple of reasons. Number one, they were very thin cables. Number two, they actually came as a bundle of 4 cables with a sleeve running almost the entire length, giving me about 6 inches on either end. Now, with a shorter cable, 6 inches on either end is obnoxious. There'd be no point in the sleeve, but for the server I was assembling, it was perfect. In this case, a 1 foot long bundle with a cable sleeve would have been an excellent fit. Would have immediately made this go away. But with that said, let's go ahead and do that just a little nudge down, since one of those was sitting on a memory module. And that's not going to be in my way. All that leaves me with now is the network adapter itself, and then installing Windows. So here's our network adapter. This really can't get any simpler. The only real downside to here is that it's network adapter or not network adapter and, as far as the PCI Express is concerned. And what I really like is that these are all just right here, right accessible, so I can grab a screw for that really quick. And I think that's the right size. Definitely a number 2 Phillips. Hey, that is the wrong size screw. Oh, what the hell? We'll use one of these. Huh. Those aren't threaded at all. I am missing a part. Well, shit. Yeah, I am missing a latching component there. I mean, they seem to... The network adapter doesn't seem like it's going anywhere. But that's kind of a bummer. Well, still, I will throw these in. These are definitely out of this system, and maybe they'll help hold things in place. Yeah, I guess those just latch in place. That's abnormal, but whatever works, I guess. Alright, so with that all back in place, all that's left for me is to grab a monitor, let it post, and install an operating system, and then we are off to the races, as it were. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a panel, and we'll get right back to it. Alright, so I am back with all the bits and pieces I need to install Windows. I picked up just a spare monitor I had sitting on a shelf. When I use this for any kind of gaming tests, I will be using that VOTech panel that we did an unboxing of recently. I don't have that back in the studio yet. That's still in the hands of our associate over who does Twitch streaming, Jay Squibb. And I don't know if you saw it this week. If you missed it, go ahead and check out the recording. There'll be a link below, and I think he's still using it in live shows, at least until I get my hands back on it. He used it for Modern Warfare, Call of Duty Modern Warfare, whatever the number is at this point, for an evening, exclusively to show off the panel and some of its features. So there's a recording of that on his stream, and I'll be taking a super cut of that and including it in our final review of that panel when we are ready. Installing Windows. I've got a flash drive. This is just a Micro Center 16 gig drive. Realistically, any decent quality drive is more than sufficient for installing Windows. Faster drives make for faster installs, but most of my fast drives are excessively large for a scenario like this. This is our Logitech K600 keyboard. We reviewed this a while ago. I keep this thing around. I use it for media center use. I use it for all sorts of small stuff like this. The multi-pairing to individual USB dongles is a lifesaver in the IT office. And as far as that's concerned, being able to quickly switch between 3 different PCs with these buttons is a huge time saver. So let's go ahead and just plug some things in. You know what? I don't miss VGA at all. And I'm sure this is going to look not great because I'll have power crossing over VGA. If you are still in a scenario where you're using a VGA cable, what I'm doing right here is something that you should absolutely never do. What I've done here is I have high frequency AC, so 60 hertz, not super high frequency, crossing over an analog video signal that's also typically somewhere in the 60 hertz range. This can cause interference. I don't know if you've ever seen it. You'll see lines slowly going across the panels. CRTs were especially susceptible to that thanks to their analog method of generating the signal on the panel itself. So enough of that rambling. So we can see here the Windows installer picked right up, is doing its thing. I know it just kind of looks like a blue screen right now. If you miss the flash of the Windows logo, this is going to pop up in just a second. If you are trying to build a gaming system or just a general use system on a budget, you can usually pick up panels like this one for somewhere between 20 and 50 bucks, give or take. This is just a 20-inch panel. This one's a 1600 by 900. You can usually get a 1080 these days. Like I said, I just had this one collecting dust on a shelf, and I keep it around for exactly this. All right, so English, US. Go ahead and hit next. We're going to install now. In hindsight, I probably should have gone through the effort to set up the cloner today, since this is going to be a little bit of back and forth. Maybe I can just get a little bit of a vertical boost here so I can see the screen better while it's recording. Nope, that's worse. Gotta love color shift on twisted pneumatic panels. See, right now I'm wishing I grabbed a faster flash drive. Okay, so we are back after a little bit of troubleshooting. It looks like one of those SATA drives I grabbed out of a drawer is having some issues spinning up that was causing problems getting to this page. We're going to tell it we don't have a key because it'll activate it itself after the fact. And we just need to pick the right edition, which I'm going to tip this up a second to read. Is going to be 10 Pro for this system. Now I'm picking 10 Pro in this instance because the system physically has a Windows 8 Pro key baked into the BIOS. And should automatically activate using that. We agree to the terms. And I want to do a custom install because I want to just nuke everything that's on this drive. And then I'm going to let it do its thing. And I've got other 500 gig drives. I'll rotate one of those out off camera. I tested them. They should have been good. That doesn't mean that between testing them and installing them, everything went according to plan. That's certainly a problem with older drives, especially spinning disks. SSDs, usually if they work, they work. If they don't, they don't. I will say that typically I wouldn't recommend just cramming a bunch of 2.5-inch spinning disks in a system like this. I did it because I wanted to use all 4 SATA ports. If you were to copy something we've done here, like I said, to build yourself your own system, I typically suggest they come with a 3.5-inch drive mount for these typically. You can get a 2 terabyte 3.5 on eBay for $35. In fact, you can get 4 terabyte drives for $30 to $50. And I've seen systems like this. Actually, it was an M83 I was looking at. We'll cover more of this when we're doing a proper value analysis. But I was looking at M83, which is a little newer. That's a Haswell system. And it was shipping with 120 gig SSD out of the box. At that point, it already had 8 gigs of RAM, second 8 gig stick, throw a spinner in it, add a GPU, you're off to the races, bring yourself up to 16. 16 gigs of RAM, more than enough typically. I put 32 in here because I had it sitting on a shelf. So there was no reason for me not to. You know, it did me no good in my parts bin. Other than looking pretty. So we're just going to let this do its thing, and that's it. We built a computer. We built our test rig here. Alright, so I've just got a section of ye old Cat 6 here, and I'm going to plug that in after I've created the user account, because I don't actually want to set up a Windows account. And it's easier to just not have internet than fight through 500 dialogues. Probably one of the worst things Microsoft has done with Windows 10 is cram those down everyone's throat. But that's neither here nor there. Alrighty, so this is, yep, we're in the US. I don't know why you're asking again, since you asked me that when I installed it. And we're going to go with the US keyboard layout, and we're going to not add another layout. Ethernet not connected, so way down here, I don't have internet. Which is a lie, but yes, I would like to continue without internet. Alright, who's going to use this? It'll be Pocketables. And I'm not going to put a password on it, mostly because I don't want to give it a bunch of questions. I absolutely detest that they added that. Let's just turn the telemetry off. So I need to... This blue on blue does not make for a great experience on the color shift provided by the twisted pneumatic panel. Some of these buttons are entirely invisible looking at it from an angle, and then even looking over in my studio monitor, because it's so much smaller of a screen and because it's wirelessly attached to the camera, I just can't see some of them. So I guess next time we do Windows install, we will loop it through OBS and then superimpose it back on the... Alright, there we go. Welcome to Windows 10. And that's all there really is to it. I'm going to go ahead and plug the cable in and activate it. I'm going to finish installing some drivers. I'm not going to install the driver for the TrendNet card, I guess, unless Windows Update does that for me. I'm going to do that during the review of the TrendNet card, which is going to feature this PC. I've got a little bit of troubleshooting to do. I think I installed a bad drive in it. I tested that drive months ago and put it in a drawer marked good. So who knows what has happened in the intervening months. I really should have retested it before I put it in here. Overall, not a terrible experience. Any issues that we ran into were, the dead drive, which was my fault for not double checking that it was still a good drive. Beyond that, I'll do a value assessment on building a system like this, not right now, but during the gaming review. And I'm going to run some benchmarks on this in a few minutes, or once I've got all the drivers installed. And we'll include some information on those in the review as well. If you have any questions about why I picked a platform like this, both for a gaming system and for a review of this card, go ahead and leave them in the comments below. If you have any questions about specific hardware choices that were made here, most of them were just what I had sitting on the shelf. This whole build sponsored by my shelf of spare parts in my wallet. Go ahead and ask, and I will do my best to either explain why we chose something, or if it's something that I wouldn't have actually suggested and simply was because it was what I had on hand, explain why I wouldn't go buy that today. Like I said, I wouldn't go buy 120 gig SSD today. If I bought a system like this that included one, great, I'd use it. But personally, a 240 or even a 500, unless you absolutely have to pinch every penny, is a much better choice. So, all that said, stay tuned for the review on that 10G base T Ethernet adapter. And I do want to take a second to thank our patrons who help make content like this possible. And I also want to thank Electrix for providing our opening and closing music.